police have got the...
Yeah, they've got it.
Well, just I quickly read the accident report, and according to the report, your report, you're not legally at fault, but you know, we have to talk about preventability. What do you think you could have done to avoid this collision?
What do you mean, what could I have done to avoid the collision? Doesn't the report say the police charged the other guy? And not only that, he failed a breath test.
Oh, I'm not arguing legal liability, Reg. But what I'm saying is you're going to go in front of an accident review committee, as you well know, and they're going to ask you the same question I just asked you. Even though you weren't legally at fault, was there anything at all that you could have done to avoid the collision?
Oh, sure. I could have been somewhere else instead of at that intersection, I guess.
Has it been established that the driver of the other vehicle ran the red light?
Yes, Richard, he admitted at the scene that he did run the red light. Well, I take it we're unanimous on this one. Had our driver taken the time to interpret the other driver's actions, he would have and should have realized that something was very wrong. And had he remained stopped instead of proceeding on the green, chances are this accident would not have occurred. All in favor of a preventable verdict? Both of these guys were very lucky the impact speed was as low as it was. And to have a 15-year record ruined like this, not good.
Well, now, isn't that just great? A professional driver with a long-standing, perfect driving record is involved in an accident that legally isn't his fault. What's more, the other driver not only ran a red light, but was found to be legally impaired. And yet, with all the evidence in the professional driver's favor, a panel of his peers still found that there were measures he could have taken to avoid the accident. Was the Accident Review Committee fair in its assessment? Well, to answer that, we would obviously need to know more about the situation. And so with that in mind, we've invited Reg, the driver involved, to join us and tell us his side of the story. And Reg, we welcome you, and I would like to say thank you so very much for taking part in the program.
Bill, it's my pleasure.
Before we talk about the incident in particular, let me learn a little bit about yourself. You've been in this business a long time.
Well, I've been driving professionally for over 20 years now.
And what about your driving record? Have you ever been involved in an accident prior to this incident?
Well, one many years ago. But for the past 15 years, a couple of speeding tickets, but no accidents.
So we might say you're fast but careful?
Now, wait a minute. I said a couple of tickets, not a collection.
All right. I accept that. Generally, you do consider yourself to be a careful driver. I mean, 15 years with your present company and not a single accident, that is exceptional.
Well, to be honest, I do believe I'm a careful driver, yeah. As a matter of fact, before this accident happened, I sometimes wondered if I wasn't too careful.
Interesting. Well, I've read the police report and the review committee reports, and I've got to say that this has to be one of the strangest occurrences that I have ever reviewed.
Yeah, it was pretty strange. The police thought so, too.
I would think so. Well, here we have a model of the accident location, the scene. Perhaps you can explain to us exactly what happened.
Well, it was just after 7 in the morning. I just started my run, and after heading west on the expressway, I exited north on County Road 10. The lights at this intersection, just north of the expressway, turned red as I was approaching, and I came to a complete stop. Now, as you see here, there's a sharp curve in the crossroads just east of the intersection. Mm-hmm. And while I was waiting for the light, this car comes around the bend. Now, the entire curve isn't visible from where I was stopped, but I did happen to notice that as the car was coming out of the bend, he veered over to the right and brushed the curb.
Sort of scrubbed it, I guess.
Scrubbed the curb. It was a cold morning, and my immediate thought was that he'd hit a patch of ice. Mm-hmm. The car then proceeded toward the red light and appeared to be slowing down. His braking and steering was a bit erratic, but again, I thought the road might be icy. By this time, the light had changed. The car was still 30 meters from the intersection, moving quite slowly and apparently continuing to slow down. So, with the green light, I checked ahead and to my left, and proceeded. I got about halfway through the intersection when the car suddenly accelerated, going through the red light, and struck my vehicle just behind the right front wheel. I didn't actually see him begin to accelerate, but judging by the force of the impact, it was obvious that he was going faster when he hit me than he had been when I last checked his position.
And so then what did you do?
I got out, went around to the driver's side of the car, and it was then that I realized the guy had been drinking.
Well, your supervisor brought up the idea of preventability in a conversation with you prior to the Accident Review Committee's meeting, and apparently you weren't very impressed at the time.
No, you're right, I wasn't. That conversation took place just a few hours after the accident. I still couldn't believe it. I mean, being hit by a drunk driver at 7 in the morning. At that point, I hadn't even thought about preventability.
Well, your company's review committee did, in fact, deem this accident preventable. Were you surprised at their decision?
Well, I wasn't too happy about it, but I can't say I was surprised. After my conversation with George, the supervisor, I gave it some more thought and realized that there was something I'd missed. Well, actually, I didn't miss it. I just didn't do anything about it. I mean, here's this guy bouncing off the curb and apparently not in full control of his vehicle. Now, I remember thinking, no, this guy must be, is this guy drunk or what? And I thought, no, not at 7 o'clock in the morning, and passed it off as being due to slippery road conditions.
So are you saying that what you should have done is gone with your first impression?
Right.
Well, how would you have handled the situation in that case?
Well, obviously, I would have stayed put until either he'd come to a complete stop or cleared the intersection.
Mm-hmm. Well, you agree then with the review committee's report?
Well, I do now. There's really not much room for argument. I mean, all the indications were there, and even though the thought had crossed my mind, I dismissed the possibility that the other driver may be impaired. And no doubt about it, in that particular situation, moving out into the intersection before actually seeing the other vehicle come to a complete stop was a really dumb move on my part.
Well, Reg, I want to thank you for sharing this experience with us.
You're welcome.
The issue of accident preventability is a matter that comes up every day in our industry. And like Reg, many of us are surprised when our company's accident review committee reaches a preventable conclusion. What we sometimes fail to realize, though, is that as professional drivers, our responsibilities go beyond the legal limits of the law. We spend a lot more time on the road than the average motorist. And the greater the road time, well, the greater the odds are that we'll have to deal with an accident looking for a place to happen. The question is, how can you improve your chances of reacting to a situation before it develops into an unavoidable accident? Well, first you'll need to see the situation developing. And then you need time to give it some thought. Try to anticipate what may happen. And finally, you'll need room to do something about it, time and space to react. Consider these factors as zones or areas relative to your vehicle. A countdown of sorts, I suppose, to avoidance or a countdown to disaster. Zone 3, the seeing zone, should extend as far as is practical beyond your vehicle, not only forward, but behind and to both sides as well. Zone 2, the anticipation zone, is the area where you'll further analyze the situation. It, too, must extend well beyond your vehicle. But unlike the visual zone, which extends from the cab out, this analysis zone must end soon enough to provide a sufficiently large reaction zone. Delay or spend too much time contemplating the situation, and you may run out of room to maneuver. Zone 1 is your reaction zone. At this point, you better have completed your analysis, planned your strategy, and be in the process of carrying it out. Now, let's take a look at how this countdown applies to Reg's experience. In Reg's case, Zone 3 did in fact extend as far to his right as circumstances allowed, right up to the point where the curve in the road disappeared behind a stand of trees. Reg actually handled this part of the countdown very well because he was paying attention and did see the car almost as soon as it entered his visual zone. Now, what about Zone 2? Well, this is where Reg made his first mistake. Although he did make an attempt to analyze the situation, his analysis was incomplete. He misinterpreted what he was seeing and dismissed the possibility that the other driver may be impaired and might not come to a stop. Zone 1, mistake number 2. Based on his anticipation that the car would stop, Reg's strategy was to proceed through the intersection. Unfortunately, because his analysis was inaccurate, he proceeded through Zone 1 to ground zero, the impact zone. You know, what it all boils down to is this: most accidents are in some way or another preventable. How many times have you heard someone say, geez, if I'd only had another second or 1 or 2 meters of space, I could have avoided that idiot? Well, they're right. Time to see and comprehend and space to react is what you need. And seeing the whole picture, what's up close, what's at a distance, that's the key. Attention to detail is also important. Let's say you're on a long, flat stretch of road and the only other vehicle in sight is a car, say 3/4 of a kilometer away, heading towards you. Even at this distance, though, you notice that the vehicle is drifting all over the road, from well over the center line, maybe, all the way to the shoulder. Well, it's obvious, isn't it? This guy is either impaired or about to fall asleep. So what do? You slow down, pull over, give him as much room as you possibly can. The problem is that sometimes another driver's actions or intentions are not that obvious. You really have to look for them. So keep the 3-zone countdown in mind. Extend Zone 3, your visual range, out as far as possible. Continually scan the entire field. Make sure Zone 2 is large enough to allow you time to think. And most importantly, make sure Zone 1 provides enough maneuvering space. In using this approach, you are far less likely to experience that ground zero impact. I'm Bill Anderson, and on behalf of the Transportation Safety Association of Ontario and its member companies, I want to thank you for joining us.